Scorpion stepped aside, revealing a young face. Seeing him, Zane Soulsby pursed his lips. Zion Hall was originally in this bar negotiating protection fees with the owner, but he heard that Scorpion had come looking for him, saying he had been beaten up. He was very curious, considering that the underground world of J City was now dominated by one leader, yet someone still dared to mess with their people. He was extremely angry and brought a group of people over. However, when he saw Zane's face clearly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "You see, even if you hand over your wife to me now, I'll still break all your limbs." Ding! Storyshots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. With Zion backing him up, Scorpion immediately regained his previous arrogance. You should know, Zion once followed with a ruthless big shot to challenge Wadsworth Bear to more than 30 fights. His strength was formidable. However, just as his voice fell, Zion kicked him in the lower back. Scorpion lost his balance and fell to his knees. "Mr. Hall." Zion ignored him and ran over to Zane. "Mr. Soulsby, why didn't you let us know you were here?" Everyone was stunned. Scorpion was dumbfounded. Ginny widened her eyes and looked at Zane. What secret did he have that made someone even more formidable than Scorpion address him respectfully as Mr. Soulsby? Looking at Ginny's inquisitive gaze, Zane thought he should explain everything to her when they got home. Zane said calmly, "This guy wants my wife to keep him company for a night." Zion's face darkened, and he waved to his men. Someone came over and respectfully said, "Mr. Hall, what are your orders?" "Break all his limbs and throw him into the river." "Yes." They immediately went over and hoisted Scorpion up. Scorpion came to his senses and shouted, "Zion Hall, I refuse to accept this. Why are you helping an outsider instead of your own people?" "I want to see Mr. Six." Zion walked over and said coldly, "I'll make sure you understand today." He took out his phone and dialed Mr. Six's number. Soon, the call connected. "Zion, what's up?" Although Zion couldn't see Mr. Six, he bent over and said, "Mr. Six, it's like this." Scorpion ran into Mr. Soulsby and even wanted Mr. Soulsby's wife to keep him company for a night. There was the sound of something being smashed on the other end of the line, and after a moment, Mr. Six's cold voice came through. "Zion, why are you asking me about something like this?" "I said to break all his limbs and throw him into the river." "He refuses and wants to see you." "Why see me?" "If he sees me, I'll break every bone in his body." "Do as you said, break all his limbs, put him in a cement barrel, and throw him into the river." "Yes." After hanging up, Zion looked at the dumbfounded Scorpion. "Understand now?" Scorpion looked at Zane and muttered, "Who on earth is he?" Zion leaned in close to his ear and whispered, "He's the one who single-handedly took down the entire underground world, Zane Soulsby." Scorpion's body swayed, his face turned pale, and after a while, he said, "Can you spare my family's lives? Harm should not extend to family, go on." "Thank you." Zion waved his hand, and the others took Scorpion away. After doing all this, he ignored everyone's stunned expressions and walked over to Zane. "Mr. Soulsby, I'll take my leave now." Zane nodded slightly. Zion immediately led his men away, cleaning up the private room before they left. Soon, the door to the private room was closed. A dead silence fell. The private room was very quiet, and everyone looked at Zane with eyes full of reverence. Zane looked at Ginny's inquisitive eyes and helplessly tugged at the corner of his mouth. At this moment, Ginny's phone rang. She took it out and saw it was Tiffany calling. "Let's go." Zane really didn't want to stay with this group of people any longer, so he took Ginny's hand and walked out. As soon as they left, the quiet private room suddenly became noisy. Everyone was guessing Zane's true identity. Only Gaylord White had a thoughtful expression on his face. Zane and Ginny returned to the VIP seats. When Tiffany saw Zane, she was about to curse him out but then saw Zane and Ginny holding hands. "You two are." Ginny smiled awkwardly, "Well, I'm going home with Zane tonight." Tiffany rubbed her forehead, not knowing what to say. She could only give Ginny a look that said, "Take care of yourself." William Mercer's face was extremely ugly, and a fierce look flashed in his eyes. He picked up a wineglass and walked over to Zane, smiling as he said, "Zane, we had some misunderstandings before. Let me toast you with this glass of wine to wipe the slate clean, how about it?" Zane didn't say anything but looked at his cane, a strange look flashing in his eyes. He knew how hard he had hit him at the time. Even if he could recover, he should have been bedridden for at least a year or so. Unexpectedly, he could get out of bed in just a few days. Your injury healed pretty quickly, Zane said indifferently, showing no intention of drinking. Ginny, standing next to him, said he met a very skilled traditional Chinese doctor who healed him with acupuncture. Although he still can't walk on his own, he's recovering quickly. Zane let out an "oh," realizing that the traditional Chinese medicine practitioner he encountered must have been a metahuman. Otherwise, ordinary practitioners wouldn't possess such abilities. Zane didn't care whether William had recovered from his injuries. In his mind, William was already a dead man. He was merely toying with him for now. At this moment, William pulled out his phone and suddenly smiled at Ginny, saying, "Ginny, Dr. Dixon has replied. He's free today. Should we have him come over tonight to check on your mom?" Ginny's face lit up with joy, and she quickly said, "That's great. Call him, we'll head back right now." "Sure." William walked away with his phone. Not long after, he returned, smiling and said, "Dr. Dixon is on his way to the estate. Shall we head back now?" "All right." Ginny was visibly happy and grabbed Zane's hand as they headed out. Zane was a bit curious. After being married for 3 years, he still didn't know much about Ginny's family members. Seeing Zane's curious look, Ginny explained, 3 years ago, my mom was in a car accident and has been in a coma ever since." "A vegetative state?" "Yes." Zane asked, "Can traditional Chinese medicine cure a vegetative state?" "I'm not sure, but we have to try." Ginny's face turned a bit somber. When her parents were still around, she was the cherished daughter of the King family, pampered and protected. But ever since her father disappeared and her mother became bedridden, her status had changed. She became the King family's cash cow. Seeing the sadness in Ginny's eyes, Zane gently squeezed her hand, saying nothing but showing his affection through his eyes. Sitting in the front, Tiffany suddenly spoke up. "Zane, even though Ginny has temporarily forgiven you, you're still on probation. If you hurt her during this period, even if she forgives you, I won't. Inspect me however you want." Zane replied nonchalantly. "Humph." Tiffany snorted. Soon, the car arrived at the King family estate. As they walked into the villa, a man who appeared to be a butler approached and said to Ginny, "Miss, Dr. Dixon has arrived and is waiting for you in the study." Ginny nodded, then led Zane, Tiffany, and William into the study. Inside, a man was standing in front of a bookshelf, seriously reading a book. Hearing the noise, he turned around, nodded at William, and then looked at Ginny, smiling as he said, "Ms. King, let's skip the pleasantries and get started." Ginny instinctively asked, "How much will it cost this time?" Saul Dixon smiled and said, "It's free, considering Mr. Mercer's connection." Ginny frowned slightly and was about to speak when William interjected, "Don't waste any more time. Dr. Dixon's time is very valuable." Ginny nodded, deciding to give Saul some money later. She didn't want to owe William any favors, especially since there were still unresolved matters between them. As they walked into a room, the smell of antiseptics hit them. On the bed lay a woman, pale and emaciated. It was Ginny's mother, Maria Carr. Saul walked over, placed his fingers on her pulse, and after a moment, said, "Her bodily functions are fine, but she's been in a coma, a vegetative state." Ginny asked nervously, "Is there any way to wake my mom up?" Saul smiled and said, "For others, she might never wake up, but for me, it's not a problem." Ginny's face lit up with joy. "Thank you so much, Dr. Dixon." Saul took out a set of silver needles and said, "Everyone, acupuncture is a family secret technique. Could you please wait outside?" Ginny nodded and pulled Zane out of the room. But Zane didn't move, frowning as he looked at Maria Carr. She wasn't in a vegetative state, her soul wasn't in her body. "Zane, let's go." Ginny tugged at Zane. Zane looked up and said to Saul, "How do you plan to treat her?" A vegetative state is a condition where someone shuts themselves in a mental space. "I need to use pain to stimulate her to wake up." Saul paused and then continued, "Of course, explaining this to you is pointless. Just wait outside for 2 hours. Zane chuckled in anger. This was clearly a case of the soul not being present. Even if Saul pricked her with needles or burned her, she wouldn't wake up. If all vegetative patients could be awakened by needles, there wouldn't be any vegetative patients in the world. "Zane." Ginny frowned, "Don't speak nonsense about things you don't understand." "Zane, I know you want to impress, but this isn't your field." "Let's leave it to Dr. Dixon," William said, belittling Zane. Saul said coldly, if you don't trust me, I can leave immediately. No, my husband didn't mean that. Please, go ahead with your treatment. I'll take him out now, Ginny hurriedly said, pulling Zane out of the room. Outside the room, Ginny frowned and said to Zane, I know you're concerned about my mom, but you shouldn't talk to Dr. Dixon like that. What if he leaves? Zane replied, let him leave then, he definitely can't wake your mom up. If he can't wake her, can you? A cold voice came from behind. Grace King pushed an elderly woman over, who looked at Zane with disdain. But when she looked at William, her eyes softened. William, you're still recovering, yet you're so concerned about Ginny. You have a good heart. William smiled, it's my honor to do something for Ginny. Good boy. The elderly woman laughed heartily. But when she looked at Zane, her eyes turned cold, unlike some people who can't do anything and only cheat Ginny out of money. Zane pressed his lips, knowing this old woman was Ginny's grandmother, and refrained from reacting. Grandma. Ginny's face turned cold, I know you like William, but can you stop elevating him by belittling my husband? Ginny, I'm saying this for your own good. Look at William, he's handsome, comes from a good family, and is gentle and refined. Why didn't you choose him and instead chose a loser? The elderly woman looked heartbroken. Grandma, this is my decision. Please don't interfere. Ginny's face darkened. Fine, I won't interfere. But don't come crying to me if you regret it later. The elderly woman was also angry. William walked over and whispered something to the elderly woman, making her laugh heartily soon after. Zane stood to the side. Ginny looked worriedly at the door. Only Tiffany remained quiet, and no one knew what she was thinking. Time seemed to drag on at this moment, 2 hours, 4 hours, it felt like a century had passed. A little past 2 a.m., the door finally opened. Saul Dixon walked out. Ginny showed a delighted expression and hurriedly peeked inside. Ms. King, there's no need to look. I can't wake Mrs. King up. Saul's face was awkward. Ginny's eyes dimmed, but she forced a smile. It's okay, it's not your fault. Ha! Tiffany let out a laugh, which only made Saul more embarrassed. Saul saw Zane, and with an encouraging look from William, he seemed to find a scapegoat and walked over. You just said I couldn't wake Mrs. King up, so do you have a way to wake her? As soon as he said this, William immediately chimed in. He's not a doctor. How could he wake her up? Dr. Dixon, stop joking. Saul mocked, he spoke so seriously just now, I thought he really had a solution. Come on, him? He can't do anything right. The old lady scoffed. Grace said from the side, Dr. Dixon, don't be too embarrassed. We all trust your medical skills. The reason you couldn't wake Auntie today is definitely because Zane distracted you with his words. Upon hearing this, Saul nodded repeatedly and said, acupuncture requires confidence. What he said earlier made me lose confidence in waking Mrs. King, and I really made a mistake. Ginny looked at Saul suspiciously, really? William said, yes, I've heard that too. Acupuncture is all about confidence. He must have lost confidence because of what Zane said, which is why he made a mistake. Ginny knew they were talking nonsense, but they were doing it to save face for Saul. However, why blame everything on Zane to save Saul's face? Doctors these days will do anything to cover up their incompetence. Tiffany said calmly. Ginny glanced at her, a flash of light in her eyes as if saying, good point. Zane also looked at her in surprise, not expecting her to speak up for him. Saul said angrily, what do you mean by covering up incompetence? I was telling the truth. If you don't understand, don't speak nonsense. Exactly, Tiffany, you don't know anything about traditional medicine, so don't talk nonsense. William said unhappily from the side. Tiffany sneered, you know very well whether I'm speaking nonsense. She paused and continued, to please Ginny, you might have brought in a fraud from somewhere. How dare you? Saul was furious and pointed at Tiffany Smith's nose. How dare you call me a fraud? Tiffany said, don't be hasty. Whether you're a fraud or not doesn't matter. What matters is that you wasted 4 hours of our time. She looked mockingly at the grim-faced William. For someone like you, nothing you do would be surprising, right? William's face was dark and extremely unpleasant. Grace shouted angrily, this is my house, not yours. Get out. Tiffany shrugged and said to Ginny, Ginny, can't you see? He brought in a fraud. Aren't you leaving? Saul was so angry his whole body was shaking, pointing at Tiffany but unable to speak. Ginny hesitated for a moment and then nodded lightly. He's not really a fraud. Zane suddenly spoke. Everyone turned their eyes to Zane. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. It was clear that Tiffany was helping Zane, yet he was contradicting her. Tiffany looked at Zane with eyes that could kill. Zane said helplessly, "Don't look at me like that. I'm telling the truth. He's not a fraud, just incompetent." Incompetent? William laughed angrily and patted his leg. Incompetent? He healed my leg. Saul looked grim and said, "Don't you think you're going too far by saying that?" "He's incompetent, and you're competent," the old lady said. Zane turned to her and smiled. "Grandma, whether I'm competent or not doesn't matter. What matters is that I can wake up Mom." As soon as he said this, William, Grace, and the old lady all burst into laughter. Their laughter was full of ridicule. Zane. Ginny grabbed Zane, not wanting him to continue. It was too embarrassing. Tiffany raised her eyebrows but said nothing. "Zane, do you know what you're saying? Even Dr. Dixon couldn't wake her up, and you can? Oh my, you're killing me." Grace laughed so hard she bent over, gasping for breath. William's face was full of mockery. "Zane, I know you want to impress Ginny, but you shouldn't say such overconfident things." The old lady's eyes were full of disgust. "I misjudged you. You're not only a gold digger but also delusional." Zane completely ignored their ridicule and smiled at the old lady. "Grandma, you don't believe me?" "Of course, I don't." "Grandma, do you dare to make a bet with me?" "A bet? What right do you have to bet with me?" The old lady's face was full of disdain. Zane smiled and said, "Don't be so quick to conclude. I'll bet that I can wake up my mother-in-law. If I can't, I'll leave J City and never see Ginny again." "Zane." Ginny was anxious. Zane waved his hand and looked at Ginny seriously. "Trust me, no one can take you away from me." The old lady was delighted, and William was also excited. "You said it yourself, Ginny, you heard it. We didn't force him." Ginny's face turned ugly. Zane continued, "If you lose, you not only have to return the shares you took from Ginny a few days ago but also give her an additional 10% of the shares." The old lady hesitated. Her high status in the King family was because she had full control of the shares. If she returned the shares to Ginny and gave her an additional 10%, Ginny's shares would reach 43%, even surpassing her by 2%. This was something she didn't want to see. William noticed the old lady's hesitation and said with a smile, "Grandma, are you really worried that he can wake Auntie up? Even Dr. Dixon couldn't do it." Grace also persuaded, "Grandma, don't you want Ginny to marry William? Since he delivered himself to us, why not accept it?" The old lady valued the Mercer family behind William Mercer. She liked William, but not enough to give up shares. Great wealth comes with risks. Moreover, the chances of Zane waking her up were less than 1%. "All right, you said it." "I didn't force you," the old lady said. Ginny's face turned ugly, and she looked at Zane with disappointment. So, in his heart, she was just a commodity. "Trust me." Zane walked over, holding her hand seriously. Ginny's face was pale. It wasn't that she didn't believe Zane, but this was a vegetative state. How could he possibly wake someone from a vegetative state? He was doing this for her, but had he considered the consequences? Zane took a deep breath. Now, words were useless. He had to show results. "Grandma, it's not that I don't trust you. I think we should sign an agreement." The old lady laughed. "All right, I was worried you'd go back on your word." Grace quickly drafted an agreement, and Zane signed it, leaving his fingerprint. Seeing the old lady also sign it, Zane smiled and walked into the room. "Zane." Ginny suddenly spoke, her body trembling slightly. "Are you really using me to bet with them?" Zane said seriously, "Ginny, trust me, I won't lose." After speaking, he didn't look at Ginny's disappointed gaze and walked into the room. He locked the door, focused his mind, and whispered, "The white deity of death." As he said this, Zane felt a wave of dizziness in his head. Moments later, a cold wind suddenly appeared in the room. The next moment, the white deity of death, wearing a tall hat, appeared. He bowed to Zane. "Greet your holy sovereign." Zane walked over and asked, "Where is her soul?" The white deity of death glanced at Maria Carr, his eyebrows slightly furrowed, and then said, "Your holy sovereign, please don't worry. I will fetch it for you immediately." After speaking, he disappeared. Zane took out silver needles. Although Maria had been well cared for by the King family, her body lacked nutrition. He applied the silver needles to Maria to help restore her health more effectively. As long as her soul recovered, she would be lively again. When Zane finished applying the needles, the white deity of death returned. Behind him was the soul of Maria. Her eyes were vacant, clearly having lost her intelligence. "Thank you," Zane said. The white deity of death looked terrified and hurriedly said, "It is my honor to serve your holy sovereign." After speaking, he waved his sleeve, and Maria's soul uncontrollably returned to her body. "Do you have any other orders, your holy sovereign?" "No, you may go now." The white deity of death bowed, and with a gust of cold wind, he disappeared. Zane did not hurry but sat down to wait. About an hour later, Maria's eyelids moved, and she opened her eyes. She looked confused. Clearly, she had not regained her intelligence and did not know where she was. Seeing this, Zane pushed open the door. Several people were waiting outside. Not knowing what they said, Ginny and Tiffany looked very upset. Seeing Zane come out, William immediately laughed. "Zane, how is it? Couldn't wake Auntie up either?" Saul Dixon scoffed. "Someone I couldn't wake up, you think you can?" Ginny, seeing Zane silent, wavered. The old lady smiled and took out the agreement, smiling as she said, "This agreement has your signature, right? Now you can leave." "Wait." Seeing the old lady about to call someone, Zane smiled and stopped her. "Who said I couldn't wake her up?" At these words, everyone was stunned. Tiffany suddenly looked at Zane. Ginny's beautiful eyes were filled with shock. The next moment, she ran towards the room. She was fast, but someone was faster. That person was Saul Dixon. He simply couldn't believe Zane could wake Maria. Saul rushed to Maria's side, looking shocked, and hurriedly checked her pulse. Ginny also walked in and saw Maria's eyes open, her gaze still empty and confused. But she was awake. "Mom!" Ginny threw herself into Maria's arms. Maria's eyes moved, then looked at Ginny, her gaze gradually becoming clear, and tears flowed down. "Ginny! Mom!" Hearing Maria's voice, Ginny cried. Tears of joy. Standing outside the door, William, the old lady, and Grace all looked extremely displeased. William took a deep breath and then walked over. "Mrs. King." Maria looked at William, her gaze softening. "William." William smiled and nodded, then asked Saul, "How is her health?" Saul nodded and said, "Very good, she can walk on her own tomorrow." Hearing this, Ginny couldn't help but look at Zane. At this moment, Zane was smiling at the old lady. "Grandma, now it's time to fulfill your promise." As he spoke, he shook the agreement in the old lady's hand. The old lady's face looked extremely displeased. After a while, she glanced at Grace. Grace reluctantly walked into the study and came out again with a share transfer contract in her hand. Zane took it, smiling. "Thank you, Grandma." The old lady's face was grim, and she did not speak. Ginny looked gratefully at Zane and then turned to Maria, saying, "Mom, you finally woke up, do you know?" Before Ginny could finish, Maria pulled out the four and struggled to sit up, sincerely saying to Saul, "Thank you for saving me. From now on, you are my savior. As long as you ask, the King family will do everything we can." At these words, everyone was stunned. William was the first to recover, thoughtfully glancing at Zane, then smiling. "Mrs. King, you're too kind." When Maria looked at William, her gaze suddenly softened. "William, this doctor was found by you, right? You're such a good child. You and Ginny have been childhood sweethearts. If you don't mind, let's set a date for the engagement." "Mom, what are you talking about?" Ginny hurriedly said. William smiled broadly. Ginny had always listened to Maria since she was a child. As long as she spoke, Ginny would not dare to disobey. He said cheerfully, "Mrs. King, thank you for your kindness, but Ginny..." Maria completely ignored Ginny's displeased expression, smiling. "Ginny has liked you since she was a child. How could she refuse?" "Mom, I refuse." Ginny said loudly, "You just woke up, don't start matchmaking. I am already married." She hurriedly ran out, pulling Zane in, seriously saying, "He is my husband. Maria looked Zane up and down, seeing that his outfit was worth less than $1,000, a trace of disdain flashed in her eyes. Ginny, don't lie to me. How could you like such a poor boy? Mom! Ginny was so anxious that she was about to cry. She turned to Tiffany, saying, Tiffany, you explain. Tiffany walked in, smiling. Mrs. King, congratulations on waking up. But you really shouldn't be matchmaking. Ginny is really married and very much in love with Mr. Soulsby. Maria's face immediately darkened. Marriage can end in divorce. Mom! Maria closed her eyes and said, I'm tired, you all go out. Ginny clenched her fists and said, no matter what you say, I won't divorce. After saying this, she pulled Zane out. Mrs. King, you rest first, I'll come to see you tomorrow. William said, turning to Zane with a challenging look. The old lady couldn't persuade Ginny, but now that Maria was awake, given Ginny's filial nature, she would definitely listen to Maria and marry him in the end. Zane took a deep breath. He hadn't expected Maria to be such a person. He woke her up, and she turned around to repay kindness with ingratitude. Ginny, are you staying tonight? The old lady asked somewhat gloatingly. Although she now had fewer shares than Ginny, it was still the King family's. Moreover, with Maria awake, she would be on her side in the future. Ginny hesitated for a moment, then said to Zane, my mom just woke up. I understand, you stay with your mom, I'll go back by myself. Ginny sighed with relief. She knew how hurtful Maria's words were. Mistaking someone else as the savior was one thing, but telling her to divorce Zane right after waking up. It was a good thing it was Zane, anyone else would have left long ago. Tiffany, help me see him home. No problem. After saying this, Ginny walked back into the room. Zane took a deep breath, ignoring their smug looks, and turned to go downstairs. Tiffany followed. She personally drove Zane home. On the way, Tiffany didn't speak, only occasionally glancing at Zane from the corner of her eye. When they arrived at the gate, Tiffany asked, how did you do it? Zane knew what she was asking but wasn't in the mood to explain, casually saying, luck. Tiffany knew Zane didn't want to tell her. For the sake of her best friend's happiness, she seriously said, I know Maria Carr well. She is ruthless and may do many unreasonable things to make you divorce Ginny. So, I advise you to be mentally prepared. Zane said, I won't divorce Ginny. Hope so. Zane got out of the car and walked into the villa. He sat down heavily and closed his eyes. He didn't sleep all night. Tiffany's words kept ringing in his ears. The next morning, the door opened. Opening his eyes, he saw Ginny walking in. Zane had just smiled when he saw Maria behind her. She had followed Ginny. Ginny ran in, taking Zane's arm, saying, Zane, I explained to Mom. She feels she misunderstood you. But she doesn't believe you love me, so she followed to observe you for a while. Once she's sure you love me, she'll leave. Zane nodded and walked over to take Maria's suitcase. But as soon as he touched the suitcase, she fell back, collapsing to the ground. Oh no! Zane was dumbfounded, staring at his hand. He hadn't even touched her. Mom! Ginny exclaimed, rushing to help Maria. Maria said, it's okay, don't blame Zane, I just lost my balance. Ginny was silent for a moment, then silently helped her up. She personally took the suitcase and helped Maria upstairs. After preparing everything, she came back downstairs. She seriously said to Zane, although my mom misunderstood you, she has repented, and she is my mom. I hope you don't hold yesterday's incident against her. I apologize on her behalf. Zane felt speechless. He now believed Tiffany's words. Maria really could do anything. She didn't even think before pulling such a low trick. It was clear what kind of person she was. Zane knew Ginny misunderstood him. But he didn't blame Ginny. First, Maria had just woken up, and Ginny's heart was all for her. Second, they were mother and daughter. Maria's love for Ginny was genuine, and she would never believe Maria would resort to such low tricks. I really was careless just now. Ginny nodded and said, yes, I know. In the future, when we live together, we will inevitably have some conflicts. I hope you can be more considerate of my mom. She has just recovered from a serious illness, and her mood is definitely not great. Okay, I will. A smile appeared on Ginny's charming face as she gently kissed Zane on the lips. Feeling the softness and sweetness, he embraced Ginny in return. Just as their kiss was getting intense, a cough was heard from upstairs. Zane glanced up and saw Maria's figure flash by. Hearing Maria's cough, Ginny quickly let go of Zane and ran upstairs. Zane sat down, thought for a moment, and then took out his phone to call Mr. Six. When the call connected, Mr. Six's respectful voice came through. "Mr. Soulsby. Find some smart people to buy surveillance equipment and install them in every room of my house without anyone knowing. Make sure there are no blind spots." "Is this for the lady?" "It has nothing to do with her." "I have my own reasons," Zane said and hung up the phone. He wasn't stupid, experiencing such an incident once was enough. If it happened again, even if it meant tarnishing Maria's image in Ginny's eyes, he wanted her to see the truth. Mr. Six acted swiftly. Not long after, a few men arrived under the guise of fixing the plumbing. They worked discreetly, and since Ginny and Maria were chatting the whole time, they didn't notice anything. About 2 hours later, they left. Zane now had surveillance footage on his phone. With a slight smile, he knew that misunderstandings were the root of the issue. With this surveillance, Maria wouldn't be able to cause trouble anymore. After chatting for a while, Ginny left. She had just obtained those shares, meaning she could now fully control the King Group. There were still many things to be done. Zane didn't leave because Ginny had asked him to take good care of Maria. The villa was very quiet. After about 10 minutes, Maria came downstairs. Seeing her come down, Zane stood up and said with a smile, "Mom, why not rest a bit more?" Maria glared at him and said coldly, "Who told you to call me Mom?" "I only said that to Ginny so she wouldn't worry. Also, didn't you marry my daughter for money? Tell me, how much do you need to leave her?" Zane replied calmly, "Ginny and I are truly in love, there's no money involved." "Don't lie. I had someone investigate you last night. With just a high school diploma and being an orphan, how could you not be after my daughter's money? I'm warning you, this is your only chance. If you refuse, you won't get anything when you divorce." Zane smiled, "I didn't marry Ginny for money." "Only you think everyone would go to any lengths for money." After a pause, he continued, "Or do you think everyone is like you?" Maria's face turned livid, sharp-tongued. "Go make dinner, I'm hungry." "Sure, I won't let you go hungry, Mom," Zane said and turned to leave. "Make dinner, make the hell dinner." "Hey, where are you going?" "Make me dinner." Zane turned around and said seriously, "I'm worried that my cooking won't suit your taste, and you'll complain to Ginny that I'm mistreating you. So, I've decided to buy some food from a restaurant for you." Maria's face turned ugly. That was indeed her plan. She would complain about his cooking, making him run around. But he didn't fall for it. Seeing Zane leave, Maria sat down, her eyes rolling as she hatched a new plan. Zane, genuinely worried she'd cause trouble, chose to buy food from a 5-star hotel. He sat in the lobby waiting. Perhaps it was the first time someone came to a 5-star hotel to order takeout, as everyone seemed curious about Zane. Groups of people gathered, occasionally glancing at him. Unsurprisingly, they were talking about him. Zane didn't mind and sent a text message to Ginny. "Ginny, did you have a tiring day at work?" Soon, Ginny replied, "The factory's issues are resolved, and the workflow is back on track." "But there's something you need to tell me. Do you know Mr. Six?" "Yes, I know him. We have a good relationship." "I see, no wonder Mr. Six helped me out. It was you behind it." "Thank you." Zane smiled slightly. The King family members were all troublesome, except for Ginny. As expected, once things were cleared up, their misunderstandings vanished. Putting away his phone, he looked towards the kitchen. Soon, the lobby manager came out with a food box. Zane paid and was about to leave when he noticed a man wrapped up tightly passing by him hurriedly. He seemed to be in a rush. Zane glanced at him and then looked away. Just as he walked out of the hotel, he saw several black Audi pull up. A group of men in expensive suits entered the hotel. Zane felt a stirring in his heart and looked towards the man in the coffee shop. The man kept his gaze on the hotel, and when their eyes met, a look of panic flashed in the man's eyes before he quickly looked away. Zane pondered for a moment, then chuckled and left. Returning home, Zane placed the food box on the dining table and shouted, "Mom, come down and eat." Maria came downstairs, gave Zane a cold look, and picked up a food box. Just as she was about to say something, Zane's voice interrupted. "Mom, this is food from a 5-star hotel. If you're not satisfied, you can specify a restaurant, and I'll personally buy the food for you. Maria's expression stiffened, and she angrily took a bite. Don't get too comfortable. One day, I'll kick you out. This was an open declaration of war. Zane accepted the challenge, smiling. Ginny and I have a love as clear as the sun and moon. No one can come between us. Maria's face turned livid. She lost her appetite, put down her chopsticks, and shouted, I want to go shopping. I don't want to eat this takeout. Zane nodded with a smile. Sure, where would you like to go, Mom? To the mall. Zane picked up his car keys and put on his jacket. Let's go. Seeing Zane agree, a look of triumph flashed in Maria's eyes. However, when she saw Zane's car, a look of disdain crossed her face. This junk car, even a dog wouldn't sit in it. Then will you sit in it? I won't. Maria snapped back to reality and glared at Zane. Zane smiled slightly and sent a text to Mr. Six. Send over a better car. In less than 3 minutes, a black Audi arrived. Seeing the Audi, her expression softened a bit, and she mocked, I didn't expect Ginny to care so much about you. A single text and she sends a car. But don't get cocky, Zane. You're just a pretty boy living off a woman. Zane didn't respond, playing the role of a driver. Zane underestimated Maria's shamelessness. While they were shopping, she sneaked away when he wasn't looking. He immediately knew what she was up to. She would pretend to be lost, making Ginny blame him for not taking care of Maria. Zane expanded his divine consciousness and quickly found Maria in a coffee shop. His divine consciousness range wasn't too far, at most 500 meters around him. Seeing her, Zane sighed in relief. But noticing who she was with made him raise an eyebrow. William Mercer. She was chatting and laughing with William, looking like they were enjoying the show. Zane thought for a moment and decided not to confront her. Instead, he found the mall manager and paid $2,000 to get the surveillance footage. In the footage, Maria sneaked away while Zane was on the phone and met up with William. They then watched Zane's anxious search with amusement. Zane saved the footage and was about to leave when he saw through his divine consciousness a man being escorted by several men in suits. The man's eyes were full of panic. Their actions were discreet, looking like they were just helping each other. As they passed Zane, the man gave him a pleading look. Zane hesitated for a moment, then followed. In an alley, one of the burly men stopped him. What do you want? Zane smiled slightly and suddenly grabbed the man's collar, slamming him to the ground. A punch to the temple knocked him out. It was swift. In the blink of an eye, the man was down. Zane moved past him quickly. The man had already been shoved into a car, and the others pulled out guns with silencers. Zane frowned and quickly lay down. With a slap to the ground, he slid towards them. A few muffled shots followed, leaving bullet holes behind him. Zane appeared in front of one man, grabbed his neck, and lifted him. The others dropped their guns and rushed at him. Zane snorted coldly and used the man as a weapon. After a while, the others were all on the ground, unconscious. Zane opened the car door, and the man inside looked at him in panic. Zane pulled him out and asked, Who are they, and why are they after you? The man's eyes flickered, but as he hesitated, Zane's face darkened. I hate being lied to. The man hesitated, then took off his hat. He had an old face, around 70, with silver hair. Seeing him, Zane squinted slightly. He remembered a news story from a year ago about a famous scientist who left his country for money and went abroad. Xavier Bates, the pioneer of artificial intelligence. Xavier nodded. That's me. Zane asked, Didn't you go to M country? Why are you back? Xavier sighed. They are M country's FBI, here to take me back. Take you back? Why? Zane let him go and lit a cigarette. Because I want to bring my technology back to my country, and they won't allow it. What technology? Xavier looked at Zane, his eyes flickering. Zane said calmly, You don't have to tell me. I can send you back to M country. No. Xavier panicked. The technology one developed is nuclear fusion, and it's already been developed. This is my last resort. Now that I've told you, please don't send me back to M country. Zane was shocked and remained silent for a while before asking, What are your plans now? I want to continue my research. You haven't finished your research? Science is endless, isn't it? Zane was silent for a while, then said, I can provide you with funding to continue your research. You'll be my sponsor? Is that not possible? Xavier looked Zane up and down and said, "It's not that I don't believe you, but do you really have enough funds to support my research?" Zane chuckled, "Of course not, but you can hand over your past research to me. I'll start a company, make money, and help you with your research. Plus, our company can split the profits 70-30. You don't need to invest any money, you just need to provide the technology." A flash of contempt crossed Xavier's eyes. "Of course, you can refuse, but I'll send you back to the M country." Xavier was furious. "You're a robber. Whatever you say." With that, Zane took out his phone and called Mr. Six. Before long, Zion Hall arrived with his men. He looked at the unconscious people on the ground, puzzled, and turned to Zane. Zane said, "Get a couple of people to send them to the National Security Bureau. Also, find a discreet neighborhood to protect him. Remember, treat him with respect." "Yes, sir." Xavier was taken away. Before leaving, he shouted at Zane, "You're a robber. I won't work for you." Zane didn't care how Xavier viewed him. What mattered to him was Xavier technology. He had always thought about starting a company but never had a clear direction. Now, seeing Xavier, he had an idea. Xavier was a talent, someone was willing to use the FBI to capture. With him around, his products would surely be the best in the world. Zane planned to give Xavier a few days to cool off. Next, he needed to put on an act with Maria. He took out his phone and called Ginny. "Ginny, Mom is missing." Ginny was shocked. How could she be missing? Zane explained, "She insisted on going to the mall. I had no choice but to take her. But when I turned around, she disappeared." "Don't worry, Ginny, she just recovered from a serious illness. She can't have gone far. I'll definitely find her." "No, I'm coming to help." "All right." Zane hung up and found a place to sit down. Soon, Ginny arrived in a hurry, her face full of anxiety. Seeing Zane, she immediately complained, "Zane, you knew my mom just recovered. Why didn't you keep an eye on her?" Zane looked helpless. "I didn't expect her to run off when I wasn't looking." "What do you mean?" Ginny looked at Zane, puzzled. Zane Soulsby took out his phone. "I asked the mall manager for the surveillance footage while you were on your way. Here it is." Ginny gave Zane a thoughtful look before turning her attention to the phone. After watching for a while, Ginny's face grew grim. She turned off the phone, sighed, and said, "Zane, Mom means well. Please don't hold it against her." Zane nodded with a smile. At that moment, Ginny's phone rang. It was William calling. Ginny answered with a blank expression, "Hello." "Ginny, don't worry. I found your mom." Ginny sneered, "How did you know my mom was missing?" As she spoke, she walked towards the coffee shop. Zane followed her. William said, "Your mom called me. I came to pick her up." Before he could finish, he saw Ginny standing outside the coffee shop, glaring at him through the glass. Maria hadn't noticed Ginny yet. She grabbed the phone and shouted, "I told you before, that Zane is no good. Just because I suggested you divorce him, he left me at the mall. You know I have no money or phone. Luckily, a kind person lent me their phone, so I called William to pick me up." "Really?" Maria felt something was off. Why did the voice sound so close? Just as she was about to speak, she saw William frantically signaling her. She turned and saw Ginny glaring at her. Maria's face stiffened, then she forced a smile. "Ginny, what a coincidence. You found me so quickly." On the way home, Maria sat in the front passenger seat, silent and looking aggrieved. Ginny glanced at Maria and said helplessly, "Mom, I told you before, William is no good. Don't try to set us up. How is he no good? He's good looking, has a good family background, and a good personality." She glanced at Zane and teased, "Unlike some people, who have no looks, no skills, and no money." Ginny parked the car and looked seriously at Maria. "He drugged me." Maria was stunned, then asked excitedly, "You were together?" Ginny's face darkened. Seeing this, Maria quickly said, "I didn't mean it that way, I just..." "Enough, Mom. I have work to do. I'll take you home. If you need anything, just tell me. I'll have someone get it for you." Ginny, looking tired, massaged her temples and took Maria home without further ado. Zane was about to get out of the car when Ginny stopped him. "Come with me to the company. Zane was taken aback, then nodded. Maria watched the car's taillights disappear with an indignant look before going inside and not coming out again. In the car, Zane asked curiously, "Did something happen at the company?" Ginny replied, "You wouldn't understand. I can't let you stay with my mom, or she'll cause more trouble." "Ha?" Ginny said, "I need a secretary. Can you help me?" Zane understood her meaning and smiled, not refusing. The secretary's job wasn't easy, but Ginny clearly didn't intend for Zane to work. She gave him a nominal position to keep him at the company. At first, Zane enjoyed it. After all, he could see Ginny all the time. But soon, he got restless. Ginny said, "Feel free to wander around. Just pick me up after work." Zane nodded and left the company, driving to the neighborhood where Xavier was staying. Mr. Six knew Zane valued Xavier Bates, so he arranged a remote but nice place for him. Xavier lay in bed while three men played cards on the sofa. Seeing Zane enter, they all stood up. Zane smiled, "No need to be formal. Continue playing." "Where's Mr. Bates?" One of the young men pointed to a room inside. Zane thanked him and went in. Seeing Zane, Xavier sat up and angrily said, "You're imprisoning me. This is illegal." Zane ignored him and looked around the room. After a while, he sat in front of Xavier and said, "Mr. Bates, why can you work for M Country but not for me?" Xavier snorted, "What do you think? You think I'm imprisoning you?" Xavier rolled his eyes. Zane said, "Maybe you misunderstood. Let me explain. I never intended to imprison you. I'm protecting you. You know better than I do about the FBI's methods. If they catch you, you'll be truly imprisoned. No, they'll use you as a tool." Xavier didn't speak. He knew it was true. "And here, I won't imprison you. I'll give you freedom, money, and the peace of mind to focus on your research." Xavier looked puzzled. Zane continued, "We're not in an employer-employee relationship. We're partners. I'll meet any of your needs. Of course, you might not believe me now, but why not give me a chance?" Xavier was silent. "With your skills, you'll be respected anywhere but never truly free, right?" Xavier sighed, "You're right. My research is too important. No country would let me go easily. M Country took my family, forcing me to go to there. Now, my family is dead, and I escaped back. But with what I know, M Country won't stop searching for me." He looked seriously at Zane, "If you keep me, you'll face the FBI's pursuit. For saving me, I advise you to send me to the National Security Bureau. I might lose my freedom, but my research will continue, and you won't be implicated." Zane smiled, "I don't fear M Country or the FBI. If you stay, I'll give you the best treatment, respect, and freedom." Xavier stared at Zane. "I've said my piece. If you insist on keeping me, I need substantial funding to continue my research on cold nuclear fusion. Deal." Zane was excited. Xavier watched Zane, unsure if he was sincere. But he had no choice. He knew Zane wouldn't let him leave easily. Zane didn't know Xavier's thoughts. He took a deep breath and said, "Mr. Bates, I plan to start a company. Any suggestions? I'm only good at research. I can't advise on business." Xavier paused, then said, "With my nuclear fusion and new energy technology, I suggest starting a car company. I have a mature self-driving project that should break into the market." "A car company?" Zane's eyes sparkled. It required a lot of funds, and even with Mr. Six's help, it might be tough. As for raising investments, Zane hadn't considered it. He wanted the company to be under his control. If cars are out, then how about phones? "I have a technology with strong battery life and decent performance. If we can lower the price, it should work," Xavier suggested. Zane nodded, "I need people. Can you call some?" "That's impossible. I can't expose my identity. But if you're entering the electronics market, I'm sure you'll find talent." Zane agreed. Having Xavier was enough. His job was research. "Thank you." Zane sincerely thanked him, chatted for a while, and then left. He asked Mr. Six's location and drove over. Meeting Mr. Six, he shared his plan to start a company. Mr. Six agreed without hesitation, "I'll give you all my liquid funds. I just want a year-end bonus. How much? I've made quite a bit recently, about 130 million. Zane nodded slightly, took Mr. Six's card without refusing. Bidding farewell to Mr. Six, he returned to the company and sat at his desk, lost in thought. Ginny didn't know what Zane was thinking and assumed he was bored. She walked over and smiled. There's a banquet tonight. Will you come with me? Sure. Zane was delighted. With Ginny's connections, he could meet influential people, making it easier to start his company. They walked to the parking lot together. Ginny's car was a Mercedes S-Class. Zane drove while Ginny sat in the back, working on the way. He glanced at her through the rearview mirror and saw the worry in her eyes. What's wrong? Ginny didn't look up. Because of Grace's issue, we have a $2 billion shortfall. We haven't been able to resolve it. You're hoping to find a project at this banquet? Ginny nodded, closed her laptop, and rested. From her, Zane learned the banquet was for the engagement of the Orne family's young master and the Yates family's little princess. The guests were all influential people. Zane parked the car, and they got out. Ginny naturally linked arms with Zane. As they were about to enter, they heard a voice behind them. Mr. Soulsby, Ms. King, long time no see. Ginny turned and saw Faith Heron.